Hello and welcome to another Thursday interview here on Viking.TV. I'm Anne Diamond, I hope you know by now, and today I want you to meet someone whose extraordinary achievements make your eyes water at just the thought of them. He has so many grueling challenges to himself, and you have to ask why. Well, he's chosen to devote years of his life to a sport, I think you call it a sport, that is one of the most demanding on your body and mind. And that's rowing. Now, I don't know if, like me, you go along to the gym and you end up counting the minutes you spend on certain fitness machines, 5 minutes on this one, 10 minutes on that one. Well, I have to say, when I get to the rowing machine, I'm absolutely thrilled if I ever get to 10 minutes. It's such hard work. So next time you do that, just imagine what it must be like, full on, hard grind rowing for 7,000 miles. That's 189 days, for instance, rowing across the North Pacific Ocean from Japan to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and at the same time fighting everything that the fierce and frightening ocean can literally throw at you. And just in case you can't imagine what that looks like, catch a glimpse of this. We've got a little clip now from Rowing the Pacific, a documentary made about my guest today. Have a look at this.
On the 8th of May 2009, Mick, Chris and Bojangles set off on their record-beating attempt across the Pacific. If all went well, they'd be in San Francisco by the end of September. But in the world's most dangerous ocean, things rarely went to plan.
Being inside that cabin when a storm hits it's terrifying.
I wouldn't say I expected the ship to go down, but I was certainly prepared for that eventuality.
So you just can't get over the size of those waves and the speed at which they come at you. That was the intrepid rowing boat Bojangles and the two men who bravely took her from one continent to another, and so became the first ever to do that. That's ocean rowers Chris Martin and skipper Mick Dawson, for whom it was yet another first, a world record, a dream come true. And he is my guest today. Joining us then live from just outside Brighton on the south coast of Britain. Welcome to Mick Dawson. Hello there.
Hello, Anne. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's brilliant to see you, and thank goodness you're there, because I think, having seen scenes like that, you're lucky to be alive.
It's been touch and go a couple of times, but I'm fairly stubborn.
Yes, well, clearly, and you are here today, and it's lovely to talk to you. And I've been reading your book, Never Leave a Man Behind. Wow. And I have to say, the little hairs on the back of your neck just stand up on end because of the things you put yourself through and the things that nature throws at you. How many times in that particular voyage did you really seriously, honestly think, maybe I'm going to die this time?
Never. On all the trips I've ever done, I've never once thought I was going to die. In 2004, rowing solo across the North Pacific, when I effectively sank after 109 days. Even at that point, I was convinced I wasn't going to die, I was going to survive. And then it occurred to me I might be wrong. So I actually I left a film in case the worst happened, so that if my family or friends found the film and not me, they would see that I had no regrets. And I remember saying to the camera, I'm set up to survive this. I'm confident I will. If it all goes wrong, though, I've got no regrets. If I'd been at home, I'd have been hit by a bus.
Well, yes, but putting yourself deliberately in front of the bus is what you seem to do. But it's interesting that you did actually do that. You actually set the camera up and spoke to camera for your family just in case.
Yeah. I mean, I look back on that now as it's gold dust for self-awareness. That in that situation, if I'd have been a gibbering heap in that cabin and panicking and wishing I wasn't there, I'd never have gone back on another ocean rowing boat. The fact that I wasn't, I look back on that and thought maybe that's what I should be doing.
Well, we'll talk about that a bit later, because you do actually do talks about that very thing. And the sheer fact that you had, I don't know, the presence of mind and the calmness to be able to do something like that meant that your brain was switched on enough to help you survive. I must ask you about that, because last week I was told that was a particular predicament you were in. I think you were inside the cabin while the boat was sinking, and you had to get out, and it didn't look as though you could. And I remember saying to everybody last Thursday, well, they're sending me his book and I'll be able to read up on it and find out what he did. And of course, they didn't send me the book about that. So how did you get out of that predicament?
Well, it was a long process. Basically, the boat capsized with me trapped in the back cabin. The only way to get that boat upright was for me to get outside. The only way to get outside was to open one of the two hatches. Both hatches were either fully or partially under the water, so that meant as soon as I opened the hatch, the boat wouldn't have sunk completely because it had sealed compartments, but it would have turned turtle completely. And I knew that, but to be honest, I knew when I went over and the boat didn't self-right that it was a survival situation. Eventually I made the decision to get out. The boat was going to go over anyway. It was the following night, and I didn't want to be trapped in there at night having to get out. So I opened the hatch, and the freezing cold waters of the North Pacific rushed in, and I had to stay in long enough for the boat to fill up before I could actually swim out.
Yes. Yeah, and presumably at that point it was sinking even more. But you did get out, and you'd presumably previously let out the life raft, because that's where you had to go, isn't it?
I actually took the life raft with me. I had a small one man life raft in the cabin with me, an aircrew life raft, and I had another bag with all my safety kit and what I considered more precious, to be honest, all the footage I'd taken on that trip. Because on that trip I'd had no communications for 3 months, so I'd filmed everything, and I'd had 60 or 70 close encounters of all manner of species of whales, and I'd filmed it all, and it was all in that bag. And when I swam out, I got out with the life raft but lost the bag. The bag got trapped in the cabin, so I lost all that footage, sadly.
Oh yeah, but you saved your life. How long were you in that life raft?
The whole process, I was expecting about 4 days, but the whole process, I think I was just under 24 hours.
Oh. And it was a passing container ship, I think, that spotted you?
Not so much a passive one. No, the US Coast Guard from Kodiak, Alaska, I had an emergency beacon. That was the only, it wasn't communications, but it was an SOS beacon. Yes. I activated that, and actually Falmouth in England got the signal, and then they found the nearest people to me, which was Kodiak, Alaska. And I'm very grateful to the US Coast Guard. They did a phenomenal job. They flew a plane over me. I remember it arriving the following night. I thought I was being run over by a ship. I could hear this noise, and I was very grateful to see the sight of a C-130 with the ramp down at the back, and the guys hanging out the ramp, the lights, the navigation lights lighting the plane up, and they were dropping flares all around me. And thanks to them, they redirected a ship, which eventually, it wasn't a straightforward process, they picked me up.
Do you ever feel that you're in a movie at that point?
That's exactly how I felt when they were dropping the flares. It felt exactly like I was on a movie set. Yeah.
But also for somebody like you who has set yourself a challenge, and it's all about meeting that challenge, was it a strange mixture of feelings? One, wonderful relief. My goodness, I'm alive and these people have come to save me. And two, I didn't do what I wanted to do. I failed. Do you ever look upon it like that?
I didn't at the time. That whole process, I'm so grateful for the fact that I had a history in the Royal Marines, and it was almost like autopilot. I didn't panic. I wasn't afraid particularly. I dealt with it naturally. It just fell into place what I needed to do, and it was the new challenge. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in the cabin, because at this stage, after 3.5 months at sea on the Pacific alone, the North Pacific had become an individual to me, and it was a battle with the North Pacific. And I remember saying, "You're going to have to do better than this to stop me." So I was already, quite frankly, I was already planning to go back.
I don't believe it. And of course you did. But you went back with somebody, which was different.
Yeah. I didn't intend to. I by chance I took part in the 2005 Atlantic rowing race, and I was basically the safety skipper. And long story short, I rescued a boat, replaced one of the crew, and rowed again with a complete stranger, who's now a great friend, Andrew Morris. And it convinced me that basically I could go with another rowing partner other than my brother, who I initially rowed the Atlantic with years earlier, and I was right. It was what was required. The North Pacific, to get into San Francisco, you need two people. You need somebody rowing at the coalface every hour possible, because that's not a helpful route. That's stopping you all the way, and it will never be done solo, in my view, and I would never have reached San Francisco on my own.
Is that right? That's interesting, but it isn't surely just the physical challenge. It's the mental one as well. Doesn't having somebody else there to pull you through the worst moments and to keep an eye on you, isn't it about that, looking out for each other as well?
There's an element to that. As part of it, you don't have the responsibility of somebody else's life in your hands, and on the North Pacific, it is that hostile. So that brings a new element to it, but the one thing that I think I loved the solo. The solo was the best experience of my life because I learned so much about myself. Yeah. But the one thing I wouldn't swap going with Chris was the fact I got to share the experience with Chris. So all the things I did alone, they're gone. I lost that nose only record. Nobody knows apart from me. I've got those memories, but I can't share them. Yeah. But Chris and I, we can meet, say one word, and it takes us both back to 100 different things we was going. So that sharing the experience is invaluable.
Now, over the years, I've interviewed a few Olympic rowers in my time, and I'm always astonished by the amount of training you have to do for rowing, but also the amount of food you have to eat every day. How many calories in training do you have to eat? And how many calories when you're actually rowing the North Pacific should you have to eat a day?
Well, I'll never attempt to convince you I'm an Olympic rower, but we had a diet of just over 6,000 calories a day. You can eat up to about 7,000, especially if you're that level athlete. Yeah. But really, after that, your body can't process it. It's just wasted. But we were certainly eating 6,000 calories. But the difference is in that process, that constant 24-hour rowing process, no matter how much you eat, you're on a spiral down. You're losing weight from day one. Oh. And so, you're going to be losing weight no matter what you eat.
But there was at one point when you were on the voyage with Chris, doing Japan to San Francisco, that you ran out of food and you were both living on something less than 200 calories a day at one point, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we took longer to get across than we'd anticipated, mainly because we were trying to hold a southerly course to get that hit into San Francisco. And we lost some food to saltwater contamination. A couple of lockers flooded. So we were actually rationing down from August. So our rations weren't 6,000 calories after really the end of July, or middle of July, really. And we slowly rationed down from 4 meals a day to 3 meals a day to 2. And as we were approaching the Californian coast in November, or end of October, November, the last rations we had was a cup of soup split into 4, which was 200 calories each.
I mean, that's not enough to keep most people alive if they're doing nothing. But you were doing hours and hours of rowing. Were you doing something like 2 hours each, 2 hours on, 2 hours off?
2 hours on, 2 hours off, round the clock. And we worked out when we got in that there were maybe 12 hours in 6 months, just over 6 months at sea, when we didn't row, when perhaps we could have. I mean, obviously there were times quite a few times when the storms hit and we couldn't row. But in terms of when we could possibly go towards San Francisco, we maybe missed 12 hours or 6 shifts in 6 months. So we were quite dedicated about that. And we needed to be. I mean, we got in by the skin of our teeth.
And how you lived from day to, well, to give everybody an idea of how you lived day to day in those sort of ways, we've got another clip from that documentary here, and we see the sort of, I don't know, the way you're living with each other, the way you interact, and even the way you have a shower. Have a look at this.
Oh, no.
Gradually, Mick and Chris were getting used to life on a 23-foot boat. They agreed a brutal rowing schedule. Each would row 2 hours on and then take 2 hours off for the entire trip. They had nearly 1,000 pounds of food on board, which allowed them to eat 5 meals a day.
There's veg, and there's tomato, and there's creamy tomato. And I don't know if I haven't seen any others.
There's lots of spicy. And they'd be producing their own water supply from seawater. To power their navigation and electrical systems, they were relying on the boat's solar panels. They soon discovered that everything on board takes much longer, and that includes having a shower.
The shower was a bone of contention between me and Chris because I'd used it very successfully before, and it was a piece of Ritz luxury on a rowing boat. However, in my attempts to prove to Chris that this was absolutely the best bit of kit we could bring, I chose precisely the wrong time to do it, when we had quite a rolling day.
Proof, if proof we needed, that Mr. Dawson is completely and utterly barking mad. It's weather like this, and Mr. decided this is the perfect time to have a shower. I will wet myself laughing. Barking mad. I had a wash last week. I'm fine.
I love that. You certainly got to know each other very well, didn't you?
Very well, yeah. I hope nobody was having the tea while I was watching that.
I mean, I look at that at Bojangles, the boat, which you designed, didn't you? You could have designed an extra foot so that you could have at least laid out straight. But to me, it looks as though two grown men there, you can't lie out straight at all.
No, it's very tight, but an extra foot is an extra foot to row, an extra weight, cost and everything. So she was perfect. At that time, she was the best ocean rowing boat in the world, and she's probably not far off even now.
She certainly looked after you well, because you had some dark moments. I don't know whether it was because maybe it was only 200 calories a day or just extreme exhaustion, but there were hallucinations that you went through. And I know that at one point, Chris had trouble waking you up at all. I mean, you were, I don't know, what was it? But he in the end, he sort of almost had to pull your leg so hard that it caused you pain to wake you up. You simply weren't waking up, and he was frightened.
Yeah, this was put into the documentary. I'm not furious, but obviously as a former Marine, I'm always 5 minutes early on watch. So I was religious on being on watch 5 minutes early. And Chris, not being a Marine, he was much more flexible when he turned up. So when the documentary made and the only mention of somebody being late on watch was me, I was, no, it was, I remember it. We'd been working through the day on things that had gone wrong. So we'd both lost the 2 hours off. So we'd been rowing effectively for about 8 hours. And then I'd gone to sleep, and I remember the alarm going off in the cabin, and I remember thinking, I'm in a school hall and it's a change of lessons. It's not an alarm, you know, and you know what's going on, but you don't know what's going on. And the next thing I knew, Chris is pulling my foot to wake me up after about 10 minutes, apparently. So, but I mean, we were exhausted.
So, yes, exactly. That was exhaustion. Was it a dream or was it a hallucination? Because that happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's your brain trying to rationalise something. Your brain's trying to get a bit more sleep, so it's just telling you don't have to get up yet. It's just you're just dreaming about being back at school. However, Chris was telling me I did have to get up because he was.
Yeah, you had ready for 2 hours. And then, of course, there was the hurricane. Another clip for people here, just to get an idea of what it's like when you know there's a hurricane coming and you know what you're going to have to go through, and it's hell.
7 days into the trip, and Mick and Chris still had 6,500 miles to go. And they were preparing to face their first storm. They had received a severe weather warning and knew that they were about to be hit by hurricane force winds.
It's a bit wavy outside. Survival suits on hand, grab bag, get ready. So we're just fully prepared for whatever eventuality happens.
And we've got lots of food.
We do have a little bit of food. The problem is that if we do need to go to the loo, then that means going out there when there's 50-mile-an-hour winds and 6 metre high waves, which I don't think either of us are particularly keen on.
As the storm struck, producing fierce 50-knot winds, Chris and Mick had little option but to shut themselves in the cabin and pray that both they and Bo would survive.
Wow.
first.
The thing that's worst about it is the threat. You can't see anything, but you hear this enormous noise coming, like a train coming. It will just hit you like a sledgehammer. It's literally like a man, a giant, standing at the side of the boat with a sledgehammer. The boat's thrown 30 metres to one side with us inside like a couple of loose eggs in a box.
Man with the sledgehammer again.
The biggest waves we saw were probably up to about 60 feet high. And you just look up at this wall of water that's just coming straight towards you. And it's pretty painful actually as well, because we're both rolling around and hitting the sides, hitting each other, while the boat gets chucked around by the waves and the weather outside.
I imagine, Mick, that, that was frightening enough, seeing that, the way you were being tossed around, the size of the waves and everything, but it must be much worse than that, because that was only the times that you were able to get out of camera.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a whole period of time, usually about 16 hours or so, when the really bad stuff comes over and you can't get out. Or if you do, there's a strong possibility you won't be getting back in again.
But from the bad times, let's go to the brilliant times. What nature again shows you. You met whales and dolphins and sharks. Actually, did you meet some extraordinary animals? What was it like actually feeling on the good days that you were just part of this amazing environment?
Well, I have to say, for me, even the bad days were good days, because I just think it's a privilege that I ever got to do this. But the biggest thing for me, especially with the North Pacific, was when I went on the solo row. I think I had, again, 60 or 70 close encounters with all manner of species of whales. And I'm talking about pilot whales, sei whales, minkies, sperm whales, on one occasion a blue whale, which is the most incredible experience. Wow. Rowing alongside a blue whale for about 45 minutes. And on that trip in particular, I was adopted, some may say stalked, by a pod of killer whales. And that for me was just, it was the reason I went back, because it's such an incredible place.
Do you get the feeling then when they come up to you that they are curious, they want to know what you are, who you are, and they stick around because they are literally just they are curious about you?
Absolutely. All the mammals were curious. Sea lions as well in the middle of the Pacific would come and investigate. Dolphins occasionally. I mean, they're around, but the whales for sure. I mean, the killer whales literally charged up to the boat to look at me.
Yeah, and they can be boisterous. If they're not even being aggressive, they're boisterous, aren't they? Which must be a bit frightening.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that struck me about them was that they are so far and away the apex predator, because even if you see a shark, sharks will be cautious about working out what you are, because you're obviously not the natural prey of a shark or anything, and they don't know what you are, so they're cautious. But the killer whales weren't. They would come straight to the boat, and they did. But I never felt threatened by any of them, really.
Even by a great big blue whale?
No, God, no, that was complete opposite.
That must have been incredible.
It was amazing. I mean, it was about...
I know you say in the book that you're not religious and you don't pray, but do you ever feel, I don't know, at one with nature, do you ever feel a bit more spiritual?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a difficult subject to touch on, religion, because it's different for different people. But I've obviously got a strong belief system. It just maybe doesn't fit into a certain box. But the non-praying thing came from when I was sinking, and I thought that I was in trouble. I thought, I'm not going to be one of those people who uses religion as a get out of jail card when he's in a jam. So I refused to say, get me out of this and I'll be a really good guy from now on. But I absolutely believe. I truly believe that I was meant to do what I've done for whatever reason, and and we're all put on this planet for a reason, basically.
Well, you've certainly explored that reason. We've got another clip here, which is just amazing because it does show some of the wildlife you encountered, some of the weird wildlife that I didn't even know existed. So let's have another look from the documentary Rowing the Pacific. Bo picks up barnacles and you've got to do something about them.
As Bo went through the water, she gradually picked up barnacles, which, if they were not removed, would slow down the boat. But while they were cleaning the hull, it was critical that Mick and Chris kept an eye out for an ever-present hazard in the ocean: sharks.
Every time I jumped in the water, I always had the Jaws theme tune playing in the back of my head and was convinced there was a massive shark just behind me at any time, ready to eat me, the boat and Mick.
We had a system where bang on the hull of the boat if you see a shark. I banged on the hull of the boat, swam across to Chris when I saw a shark beneath us. And he had gone from, I'm not sure if we should go in without somebody on watch, to, well, it's not bothering us, is it? I said, it's a shark. It's working out whether it's going to bother us. To which point we got out.
But not all the sea life was so threatening. Travelling through the Pacific gave Mick and Chris a unique opportunity to see some of the more unusual animals, like the strange, prehistoric-looking sunfish.
I didn't even know that sunfish existed. What an extraordinary creature is that?
It is. It's also the only thing in the ocean slower than we were.
Well, yes, and you have to remember, through all of this, you're rowing. What was it like to eventually get there, to actually go under the Golden Gate Bridge and know that you'd done it?
Oh, it was amazing. We arrived, appropriately enough, on Friday the 13th of November. And effectively, we'd lost the only race that we were in, and that was to beat the winter into San Francisco. The last 6 weeks, the last 1,000 miles, by far the toughest thing I've ever done in my life. So to see that bridge, and it wasn't so much see it, because when we rode under it, obviously we were facing the other way. And after, at that stage, nearly 9 years of my life trying to do it, I felt it, because the shallow of it came over us before we went over it. So I felt it, and then I looked up like I'd looked up 1,000 times on all those other rows, imagining it to be there, and there was a Golden Gate Bridge above us. And yeah, there's a brilliant picture midway beneath the bridge, shaking hands, and it just about sums it up.
An amazing feeling that must have been. Actually, we've already got a question about that sort of moment. James from Colchester has said, what happens when you arrive, for instance, in San Francisco? Do you need to hand over your passports, or does a pilot boat come out to inspect you? Actually, what logistically happens when you've actually arrived?
That's a really good question, because you're meant to go into Oakland to clear customs. But fortunately, Andrew Morris, who I unexpectedly rode the Atlantic with, had flown himself out, and he had arranged for customs to come to the Golden Gate Yacht Club in San Francisco, which was easier for us to get into. Yeah. And the customs were there purely because they wanted to see us. And what really helped was that the mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, came down to see us in. So they came and said, we've come just to shake your hands, but because of the bosses here, we've got to get a stamp in your passport as well. Yeah. So they were fantastic. The American people were fantastic, and that was really just the start of just the most incredible welcome. I couldn't even get a taxi fare back to my motel and pay it. They just couldn't have been kinder to us.
Isn't that brilliant? Yes. And after all of that what you'd been through, the 7,000 miles of sheer hard work to get there, and braving all of the odds, you'd gotten there and you'd done it. And at some point, your little brain went, I'd like to do that again. I just don't understand you. But let's go right back. Because you were a Marine, as you've said. You were a veteran of the Falklands War, part of the task force sent right down to the South Atlantic to liberate the British Islands from the invading Argentine army, just in case people don't know. But you were so young at the time. You were just 17. You joined up. You can't have joined up very long before it all happened.
I joined up just after my 16th birthday. I passed out of training, would be 10 months later. And I'd just joined my first unit, done a Norway deployment, which was quite handy just before the
Very handy. Yeah.
Came back from Norway, and we thought we were going on Easter leave, and the next thing we were sailing 8,000 miles to the Falklands.
Yeah, and it took a long time for the task force to get there, actually, didn't it? And what sort of soldier were you? What were you doing then? When you
I literally just joined Air Defence Troop. as a very young Marine. I was lucky I could go, because at that stage you could go to a war if you were 17 and a half, and I was just over that threshold. Now I think it's after the first Gulf War they made it 18, so I was fortunate that I could actually go. And we were basically part of the support team for the commando units that were landing with the paratroopers to retake the islands.
My goodness!
It's actually a shoulder-launched air defence missile.
Yeah. And what a very young age to learn a lot. But you've talked about it before. The training has turned out to be something that has helped you throughout life, or through the challenges that you've set yourself in life.
Well, both. I mean, I always describe it, the best decision I ever made was to join the Royal Marines, and the second best was to leave. But I don't think you ever leave. I mean, it was right for me to leave when I left, but I'm still hugely connected to the Corps. Lots of friends from 40 years ago.
Yes,
that never goes away.
Yes, you clearly made a lot of friends, and you've got in touch with them again. I think we've got some pictures of you as a young soldier. It must take you back, looking at some of the pictures of you in the Falklands and things like that. Incredible. So what happened when you left? Did you feel like a lot of people do when they leave a military life, that you don't quite know where you are or what you want to do? Did you know?
I did know what I wanted to do. I learned to sail while I was in the Marines, and a lot of my times in service, a lot of the work I did was from and on ships. It was very much like the amphibious side of things. So I wanted to sail. All I ever wanted to do was join the Navy, but my brother joined the Marines just as I was leaving school and diverted me, fortunately, towards the Corps. So I'd learned to sail, and I left to become a professional sailor. And basically ended up sailing private yachts, which...
So at one point, if I'd been rich enough, I would have hired a private yacht and you might have been the skipper. Early on, not the skipper, but eventually a skipper. Yeah, I was, the rich Navy. Yes, exactly. Well, you see, that sounds really nice. But there you go. You still are setting yourself targets, because wasn't it a book about Everest that got you thinking about setting yourself something much more difficult to do and eventually looking at ocean rowing? I was hugely disenchanted with the whole environment in private yachting.
As I look back on it now, I'd left the Royal Marines, which was a really close-knit environment where basically people will put their lives on the line for you without a second thought. And I moved into an environment where people wouldn't give you 5 minutes of the time unless there was a monetary value, or it seemed like that to me. And I think looking back on it now, I was suffering from that adjustment syndrome that people have when they leave the services. And I needed something to take me back to the purpose I had in the Corps. And by chance, I read the book Into Thin Air. And Everest, I'll climb Everest. I had a certain amount of experience there, and within 3 years, I could reasonably expect to summit Everest. So I thought that would be my plan. And then literally a day or two later, I picked up a magazine, opened the magazine, and there was a rowing race across the Atlantic. And I thought, well, I can do that now. Just got to build a boat. So I rang my brother up and told him he was in my team, and we went.
My goodness, it was eventually it led, because I have to cut a very long story short, to your amazing voyage across the Pacific with Sparky. Now, why on earth would you want to put yourself through that again? And why on earth would you want to take on the challenge of a blind crewmate? You'll have to tell us who Sparky is.
It was really a complete coincidence. I wasn't meant to be in the country. Hurricane Irma had written off St. Bart's. I had a job in St. Bart's to go to. That job, along with the island, was destroyed. And I went down to my local pub, and by pure chance, Stephen Sparks walked into the local pub, and I hadn't seen him for 38 years. And within 2 hours of meeting him, we decided we were going to take part in a race from California to Hawaii.
You decided it. Now, he's very blind. When I saw, that's a bad way to put it, but he does have some peripheral vision, but essentially he can't see.
He's registered blind. He has no macula, no central vision, no detail, but he has some peripheral vision. But he'd lost his sight in service. And I knew this. I remember it happening, although I hadn't seen him at the time. And I assumed he'd been well looked after, but he'd effectively been abandoned by the system. And for 10 years, he was literally discharged with no rehabilitation, no help, certainly no compensation, no job, nowhere to live. And 10 years later, UK Blind Veterans, a charity for blind veterans, found out about him, brought him back to this country and gave him the first rehabilitation that he'd ever had. In fact, they were just round the corner from where I live. That's why I bumped into him. And when he told me this, I was horrified. I mean, it was just so wrong. And I just, well, actually the landlord said, has a blind person ever rowed across an ocean? And I said, I don't think they have. Why don't you and Sparky do it? And it just seemed a way of repaying him. Sparky was a stellar Royal Marine. He was destined for great things.
I see, because I mean, the reason I'm smiling at that point is that I'm thinking, just what you want to say to a blind veteran who's been treated badly is, let's go across an ocean, let me take you into the worst environment you can possibly imagine. But he was up for it, clearly.
Well, I did say it'd be a really sunny trip and that he'd enjoy it. It turned out not to be.
It did.
Yeah,
I mean, somebody's just put another question: is how on earth do you train for things like this? Well, let's have a look at this clip, which shows us how on earth you start to train yourself, but how you also train a blind veteran to go with you for this extraordinary trip. Let's have a look at this now.
Of course it's dangerous. Right in the middle of nowhere, there's no traffic wardens out there, no police cars.
The nearest land is usually about 4 miles away, straight down.
I'd be a liar if I said I wasn't.
I'm not afraid of dying, I'm afraid of not living, which is far more dangerous. When you've rowed across an ocean, that's a very small club you belong to. One thing I actually would say, not just to Sparky, but to anybody who does this, is remember it. You're so tied up with what you're doing on an ocean rowboat, it's so intense, you kind of forget that you're doing it. It is the most remarkable place to go to in the most remarkable way. I've always described it as having the best seats at the greatest show in town. Embrace it while you're doing it, because it's a unique place to be. You don't want to be rushing through that experience and not appreciating it while you do it, because it very soon becomes just a memory. The fact that there's a disability or a weakness or a perceived weakness, we've all got those, and anybody who rows across an ocean will find them.
Well, there's always doubters in life, but if you go into anything thinking you're not going to finish it, there's a chance that you might not finish it.
There's not a single day on an ocean rowing boat that I would swap for one single day on dry land.
I think, having watched that, it's very difficult for a lot of us to understand what he would get out of that experience. Because to me, rowing across an ocean is about what you see, isn't it? And if he can't see, it's just experiencing, I don't know, darkness and water splashing in his face and all. I don't know. What did he get out of it? What sort of a person is he that he clearly did get something out of it?
Oh yeah. It was an amazing process. I've got to say that the equipment we had on the boat for him to cope directionally with rowing, because obviously I was asleep a lot of the time he was rowing, basically all of it failed, and we got really tough weather off California. It was nightmarishly difficult, lots and lots of storms. So we had to basically get him rowing. We trimmed the boat up, and because he'd got some peripheral vision, he could see shapes.
Yes, you can see things on the out edges.
That's right, yeah, but only blurred shape. But he could see, we had a Union Jack flag flying, and he could see that direction. So we would set the boat up for his watch. I would tell him when he was on course. He would see what direction the flag was blowing at, and we didn't have that large one on the front during the crossing. That was just for coming in. And he would use that as his steering reference. And then he developed where the wind was on his face and where the sound was on the boat, where the waves are hitting the boat. And he was basically rowing that boat in the most natural way that you could.
Yeah.
That was a learning process for both of us. But you're right, the thing about the visual stimulation I'd been ignorant of, and he told me at one stage how it was driving him, it was like being in solitary confinement. I said, well, I'll describe things more to you. And almost immediately, I was cooking food, and he was sat opposite me to balance the boat, and we were surrounded by flying fish at this time for a long period of time, going into in the last stages of the Hawaiian trip. And this huge flying fish came out about, I don't know, 12 or 14 inches long, took off on a flight, and there was a bird near us, and the bird basically got into a dogfight with this flying fish, and the flying fish managed to avoid it, but I described every bit of it to Sparky over his shoulder. And it was that kind of thing. From that point on, I was trying to
bound very tightly together. Now look, I've read the book and I think it's fantastic. There are 3 things that stood out from this particular episode. That you said you never pray, but there was one moment when you did.
With Sparky, yeah. I finally, it was. I mean, the book tells the story, but we named the row "The Death of 1,000 Cuts" because it was so tough. I mean, to give you an idea, within a week of us setting off, there was 5 boats set off. 2 teams had dropped out. One of those teams, 2 really strong American pair, who just rowed across the Atlantic. They capsized, and they basically decided to stop. We'd carried on. We'd been Sparky had been smashed, almost capsized once, caught out by a big wave, snapped 2 oars because he couldn't see the wave coming. We were down to the last set of oars. Sparky got injured. He got a compression fracture across his back, which nearly crippled him, and he could barely move around the boat, let alone row. And then as we were approaching Hawaii, by this time we're down to our last pair of oars, so 1 more oar snaps and we don't go anywhere. And he mentions that he's also suffering from a condition called colitis, which he had tablets to control. But we'd taken longer than we'd anticipated. He'd lost some of these tablets, and he said, "I've only got this many left," and it wasn't enough to get into Hawaii. So I said, "Well, how serious is this?" He said, "Well, I've nearly died from it twice," which is quite serious. Yes. He said, "But don't worry, because it doesn't just happen when the tablets stop." I said, "Well, what brings it on?" And he said, "Stress." Oh no. So at that point, I was the only one rowing at that point. We were still about 1,000 miles from Hawaii, or little more than 1,000, or a little less than 1,000 miles. And I just thought, we're not going to get in. We're just not going to make it. And everything rode on us getting in. Sparky getting off that boat would be such an example to so many people. Mm-hmm. Sparky not getting off that boat, if he gets, rescued, it's a complete opposite. And I didn't know if I had any more answers. And I'm almost embarrassed to admit, but I just said, please, give me a hand. Mm. And most annoyingly, the following morning, we then rowed straight into a current, and literally, take it how you will, that current.
Oh my goodness, as you said, take it how you will. Another thing that stood out for me was the sound of a hurricane. And you said that it made you appreciate some of the old poetry and the old prose that you read about the old sailors, when they believed the ancient stories of sirens luring the sailors onto the rocks or whatever. You say that the sound of a hurricane is like that. You can appreciate those old stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Even more so if you was on a ship with rigging. I can only imagine what they must have sounded like. But yeah, I mean, superstitions and all those things that come from the sea, if you spend any time at sea, you would realise where that comes from, because you are very much put in your place in the universe when you're at sea. You're a very vulnerable individual, and it's still fantastic. It's like being in the mountains when there's a storm. If you're at sea in a storm, yes, you don't want to be there, but it's still a privilege to experience it. It's nature, it's elemental, and it's just phenomenal.
It's interesting you mentioned the word universe there, because the other standout moment for me was one night you were describing how sometimes when you're on the ocean at night, because there's no light pollution, the sky can be an absolute feast of stars from one horizon to another, and it's the most amazing sight. And one night I think you were so moved that you went and woke up Sparky, because you thought that even though he was mostly blind, he might be able to appreciate it, and he did. Tell me the story.
Well, that was part of, I was trying to make up for the fact that the story I'd sold him in the pub about this wonderful sunny trip to Hawaii wasn't going that way. And the first month we had literally four times, and I'm talking about a couple of hours each, when we had a blue sky, let alone no chance of sunshine for a day or anything. It was, I describe it like being off Grimsby in October. It was so, Grimsby is a very northern port in the UK for the Americans watching. Yeah. And then we had a night with no clouds. And obviously it was depressing me, this constant greyness. So I knew it'd be depressing Sparky. And I said, Sparky, with your vision, which is effectively night vision he's still got left, would you be able to see the stars if I turn the light off? Because we had one navigation light on. And he said, yeah, if you leave it long enough, I should be able to. And it was this amazing moment, because anybody who's seen the stars at night or on in the wilderness without any light pollution, it is phenomenal. And I turned this light off, and then I dropped back into the cabin, and it just amazed me. I'm thinking, there I am, sitting in the ocean. There's a blind man out there now seeing a view of the universe that 99.9% of the people on this planet will never see. And it's the first part of the trip where I felt that he was getting something out of it that he should have. He certainly deserved the effort he was putting in.
That was a gift in a way, a remarkable gift that you enabled him to see, to literally see. Yeah,
for both of us,
isn't it? How did you feel then when you actually got to Honolulu? Did you? I mean, it's enough for you to be going through the moment of actually reaching your destination, but did you have to describe certain things to Sparky?
Well, it was the last run in was unbelievably tough, because we happened to arrive in Hawaii, or 150 miles off Hawaii, when the second Category 5 hurricane in history decided to arrive, Hurricane Lane. So it looked like we were going to not even, I mean, touch and go whether we survived, really. And even we got through the hurricane somehow. It was right up until we rounded the point at Diamond's Head and the finish line. I didn't know we were going to get in. It was so difficult, so rough. But when we got to that point, and then the boats came out to see us over the finish line, and it was we were just, everything was described to him. I was, Nicky, his partner, was there, and Natalie, my partner, was there. And by this stage, I'd got good at the describing.
I was going to say, I mean, you're rowing and you're taking in the moment, but you're also, you're keeping up a commentary for him.
No, we agreed. When he was injured, I said, all you've got to do is be fit enough to row across the finish line. And he actually, before that, he recovered enough that he could spell me occasionally to row during the day, but he was definitely going to row across the finish line. So I was actually steering the boat. He was rowing across the finish line. It was very, very rough. And then we went across, and then he told me that he had a flask of port that he'd been given to celebrate the crossing. And it was still another 2 hours into the yacht club from the finish line, which he insisted on rowing while I regularly topped up the port glass. And we did try. The deal with the port was that as soon as we see Hawaii, we raise a toast. Yeah. I'd seen Hawaii about 3 days earlier, and I said, I've seen Hawaii, I've seen the volcano, but get the port out. And Sparky said, I can't see it. So we had to wait until we were right on top of the island to open the port.
But what an amazing moment that must have been. Not only just an amazing thing for you to have accomplished, but for Sparky, it meant a lot, not just for him, actually, but for anyone who's been through his sort of problems. Can you describe how incredible an accomplishment that was?
I can't. I don't think anybody else on this planet in his position could have completed that with the challenges that we had to face. I mean, it's always going to be difficult, but I mean, it was just endless, the challenges we faced, and he came through them. He's the most remarkable person I've ever met, I think. When I met him in the pub, he was with two of the blind veterans, And he told me the situation, what had happened to him, and then he disappeared. And both of those guys and numerous blind veteran members since have told me the same story, that when they became initially blind, they would retreat to the room, they would have alcohol brought to them, they did not want to engage, they just want to drink and forget. And then there'd be a knock on the door, and it would be Stephen Sparks saying, come on, we're going out, I'm going to show you how to use the bus, take you shopping, take you down the pub. And everyone to a man and woman said the same thing. Stephen Sparks saved my life. And what we were trying to do with that row was to do that on a bigger scale so that people could look at what he's achieved, which is immense, and think, well, that means I can achieve, on whatever scale you wish. I can use a bus, I can go shopping, I can engage. If that guy can row across the Pacific, I can do this. And him stepping off that boat, I think, I know he did that.
Absolutely remarkable. And your family were there to greet you. Sadly, not your father. Wasn't it during this voyage that you were told the very sad news that your father had died?
It wasn't. No, it was in 2009.
Oh, that was the one with Chris. Yeah.
Chris, yeah.
Your father was very, very proud of your achievements, and he would have wanted you to go on breaking record after record, wouldn't he? He
would have done what I did, but his generation didn't have that opportunity. He was the biggest supporter, enjoyed it the most. He loved going to the start, and he came to Japan with us for one of the departures. Well, I think he was in San Francisco when we arrived, but he definitely would have been there with Mum if he could have been. It's one of the. Unfortunately, it's a natural progress of life that you lose people. But I had the very good fortune that I had a great life for my dad, and had the privilege to become his friend as well as his son.
Yeah, and he had the privilege of seeing you achieve the things you did, and he was very proud too. You've gone on to work with other veterans. You've set up the Cockleshell Endeavour. What is that?
It's basically, that's the project that Sparky and I rowed the Pacific under. It started, I went back to the Falklands with a friend. I was asked to arrange a trip back to the Falklands for him by his mum for his 50th a few years ago. We can go back with the MOD, so it's quite affordable. We went back, and long story short, we walked through all the areas that we were involved with. We walked up Mount Harriet, which he had fought up in the Battle of Mount Harriet, where he was just a few months older than me, 18. And at the top of Mount Harriet, he told me that he'd been having a few issues with what he thought was PTSD. He'd gone to the major charity to help with that, and they said, yes, you tick all the boxes apart from suicide. He wouldn't admit to that. Go away, no drugs or alcohol for 3 months, and we'll diagnose you officially. And at the top of Harriet, next to the cross that's there for the guys that died on that battle that he fought, and he said, if I could do that, Mick, I wouldn't need their help, would I?
No, it's a lot to ask, isn't it?
It's
to help to get there in the first place.
Exactly. It was a door being shut in his face. I knew how hard it was for him to ask for help in the first place. I knew he wouldn't ask again. So I said, well, we'll do something to cover that 3 months. He said, what? I said, I was on top of the mountain. I was looking around the Falklands. He goes, we'll paddle around the Falklands. How hard can that be?
Oh, yes.
So it's really hard, actually. It's not the best place to have that idea.
No, cold, wet and blowy. You sent us a couple of clips, little video clips, I think of you with him, and paddling is not what it is.
This is Sparky and me rowing across the Pacific. We were in kayaks in the Falklands, but it wasn't dissimilar.
No, absolutely. Very, very blustery, very blowy, but a challenge. And I guess if you are suffering from PTSD type problems, it does give you something else to think about, doesn't it?
It did. It became really 3 years of a number of different events, and it transformed Steve from a guy who basically had done nothing in 25 years in terms of phys to a guy who came, I think, 9th in the Yukon Great River Quest, a 440-mile non-stop, pretty much non-stop kayaking race in Canada. We'd done the Devizes to Westminster, came 2nd in a canoe like that, and then we eventually went back to the Falklands. We didn't go around we planned to go around the whole of the Falklands. Unfortunately, we weren't at the level to do that. We went around East Falkland, which is about 130 miles on a 10-day exped. But it was even more important because that's where all the fighting was, all the important places. And we got to know the locals, which was brilliant.
Yes, and they are still to this day so thankful of the things that you did.
They're amazing people.
Writing your books, you've written, well, I can't make up my mind whether it's 2 or 3. we've got some copies of your books there. But I mean, is it cathartic writing about it? Do you keep diaries? How can you remember what you've done per day?
Well, on the rows, I keep logs. I treat it the same as I would a professional yacht. So I've kept logs, and I made a point of putting more information in the log than just the details. I'd put how I feel, little reference points to take me back to it. And we kept blogs and things on the stuff we did with the paddling, so that was easy to go back to. But yeah, it was cathartic. I was racked with doubt if anybody had ever published it. The first book, Battling the Oceans in a Rowboat, I'd spent 8 years trying to get it published in the UK, and I'd given up. And I was, by chance, I came across a literary agent in America on an online course who asked about what I was trying to self-publish at the time. She said, send me through a couple of sample chapters, and within 20 minutes, she said, I'll have this sold to a publisher within 6 months. So Battling the Oceans in a Rowboat is the American publication.
I see.
Rowing the Pacific is, believe it or not, foreign rights, the English version.
Yes. But I mean, you can Google them and you can find out how to get them. And you have your own website, I think, where you can sell them, don't you? Right. But it's fascinating that the writing of a book like that, and a publisher even turning it down and saying, "I'm sorry, it's not interesting enough." How can they do that? I mean, it's so exciting. It's so dangerous. It's so amazing what you actually went through. I can't imagine any publisher saying, no, it's not interesting enough.
Well, the second book, the English publisher took it straight away. So I've got no complaints. He's fantastic. He's a real enthusiast. I have to say, one of the rejection letters I got for the first book was, if I remember this correctly, great story, really well written. You have a great style. A shame you're not a celebrity.
Right. Okay.
Which destroyed me, because I thought, well, all the other things I could work on, but I could never be a celebrity.
Yeah. Well, and you wouldn't
want to be.
You've achieved things. How has COVID affected your plans? Because I know you were planning on doing stuff this summer, weren't you?
Yes, I was working with a team of 2 serving Royal Marines, 2 recovering veterans to take part in the Pacific race. I had hoped to set it up so that a team of US Marines would race against them. The US Marines failed to get a boat to the start line, but it didn't matter because obviously the race was cancelled. So those Royal Marines are now, literally the training now, they're going to row across the Atlantic just before Christmas, or start just before Christmas.
And who was that we just saw in the picture there?
That was Steve Grenham. That was on the Yukon.
That's on the Yukon, right.
The Yukon River Quest, the race up to Dawson City, appropriately enough.
And somebody has already emailed in a question saying, what's next? What's your next target? Because you're clearly the sort of person you just have to have something to a challenge to anticipate.
Well, I was meant to be paddleboarding on the Yukon, 1,000-mile race up the Yukon to Alaska this July.
1,000 miles? Oh.
Yeah, 10-day, I think it's a 10-day race. So that's been postponed till next year with COVID, as pretty much next year, everything this year has been. So that would probably be one of the things I'm looking to do. But if I'm honest now, it's really, I'd like to set things up for other people to do. I've seen the value of these projects, and they don't have to be on the scale of rowing the Pacific. But
no, as you say, you can tailor a challenge to a person, almost, can't you? You could paddle around a Falkland island, or there are lots of other things as well. But clearly, it does have an effect.
Oh, it has a massive effect. I think it's a very simple process. It's getting people together who speak the same language, and I mean that by the same history, the same things in common, in a focused environment where they're achieving a challenge, whatever that may be. In the same boat, ideally. We found that when we got into separate boats, it doesn't work so well, the paddling. But so you get them in that environment, you get them talking, and if people, especially with mental health issues, are talking, then there's some way down to that road to recovery. There's much more to it than that, but it gets them down that path to recovery and getting the help that they need. And fitness is a big part of it as well. Just getting fit.
Well, it's physical and mental. It's the two things, really, isn't it? And you could say it's a very old-fashioned medicine, is actually getting out and doing something, but you're enabling that. Lynn has filed in a question. She's from New Bern in the United States. She said, we were on the March Viking cruise. with you that was turned back halfway across the Atlantic. We wondered if you had trouble getting home, or if maybe you decided to row back home. So you were on a Viking cruise at the time that sort of lockdown started.
Yeah, it's Miami to Barcelona, and it became Miami to Miami. Unfortunately, I have to say it was still an excellent cruise. We had a fabulous time, and we even got home quite amazingly smoothly, considering what was happening with the world then. But we were very well looked after by Viking. And
how did you feel though on a Viking ship, standing on your balcony, probably with cocktail in your hand, looking out? Still on the same sort of ocean that you'd rowed across. What was it? The difference being on a luxury cruise ship? Did you enjoy it? Could you enjoy it?
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love being on the cruises. I mean, not for the obvious reasons anybody would. They're fantastic ships. Crew are fantastic. But to tell the story I tell and have that chance to tell it while you're going across an ocean, there's just no better audience and no better venue. And it also, the thing that happens, I get to tell it in 6 different installments. So I can talk about things in detail that normally I just give a minute's sort of acknowledgement to. So I get to tell a whole story. So there is literally no better place to tell my story than
than when you're actually able to look out on the sea as well. Yes,
everybody.
On the ocean. And that's when you realise the vastness. I mean, again, I've never done the sort of things you've done, but just being on a cruise ship, and occasionally when you're just at one of those days where you're just at sea, and you can from one horizon to the other, there's nothing but ocean. You really do, like you said earlier, you start to understand your place in the world, don't you? Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Which is never a bad thing.
And there was that one moment where you said, and the nearest land is 4 miles down.
Yeah.
How terrifying is that?
Yeah,
I'd rather be on a big cruise ship, I can tell you. Kevin says, loved meeting you on board our last Viking cruise. There you are. Thanks for all the fascinating lectures while we sailed the Atlantic.
I know, Kevin, it's fantastic. We met quite recently.
Okay, I've got another one from John in Exeter who says, ask him about the music.
John's an astronomer from Viking that we've shared a cruise together. He's referring to my love of Dean Martin.
Oh, Dean Martin!
Yes. Yeah, Dean Martin was the primary source of entertainment on my brother and I's first Atlantic crossing.
I thought you were going to say something like real hard rock or something, but Dean Martin having a croon to you while you're in that environment, that's quite extraordinary. Noel, this is a quick one, I hope. And Noel from Malibu says, how much water and food do you pack for a voyage like that? And for how many unanticipated days do you generally store provisions? So how much do you take with you?
Well, on the North Pacific, we basically filled the boat up to capacity. We couldn't have taken any more. And we were estimating at 6 months maximum. And it took us just over 6 months. But even with rationing, we ran out literally in sight of shore. But that was because we'd lost food to corruption, saltwater corruption, which we hadn't anticipated. That was the killer. But in terms of water, we have a desalinator unit. Everything on the boat is recharged by solar panels. And the desalinator unit is absolutely vital, not just
you did that every day, didn't you? Desalinate and provide yourself with water. John in New York says rowing is a very Viking way to cross the ocean, though the Vikings, of course, had sails. Did you also have a sail on your boat?
No, that would be cheating.
Just for safety reasons or anything like
that? No, it wouldn't. No, it would probably create more problems than it would solve. But no, it's totally man-powered. To be honest, the boat is subject to windage, which is great if you run across the Atlantic because that trade winds that are trying to take you to the Caribbean. The North Pacific, I think the wind was favourable for us for about 6 hours in 6 months. And like perfectly favourable. There was no following winds. We were constantly battling to some degree, north or south, to get across. It was an attritional route.
Somebody else has got a question saying, and it's funny you touched on this an hour ago. What have you learned about yourself from your expeditions?
I think I've confirmed an absolute passion for the sea. It's exactly where I want to be and what I love doing. And I've probably got without sounding arrogant, a level of stubborn determination I didn't actually think I had. Because of that environment, because I love what I'm doing, you find the resources when you're trying to achieve a challenge that you're passionate about. So, I'm maybe a better person I thought I was.
Yeah, you're more stubborn than you knew. Another Roger in the United States says, how do you stay fit? So, for instance, during this last few months, do you work at staying fit, or do you just do it when you are rowing?
Generally, no, I train all the time, really. That's, again, a hangover from the Marines. I'm getting on a bit now, so it's slowing down. But during lockdown, we took advantage of the 1 hour walk around, because we live by the coast, and we trained in the garden pretty much every day. We set up circuits and trained every day. So, it's very conscious I'm getting older, and if you let it go when you're older, you're not getting it back.
Well, it's harder to get back, I imagine, yes. Yeah. So what's your next plan? I mean, we don't know particularly how soon we're going to get back to some sort of normal. Goodness only knows what normal is for you anyway. But do you have anything in your sights at the moment to do next?
Well, there's a secret one. There's a gentleman connected with Viking who asked me to do a project with him. I can't say any more than that, than he's connected to Viking, because he'd shoot me if I said that. But I need to have a chat with him, because he was looking at a project and he thought that he was foolish enough to think I might be a good partner to go on. So that may happen in the future. He's certainly somebody I'd be happy to I won't say row with, but take part in an expedition with. But again, I think the most important thing is to get Cockleshell Endeavour on a footing where there's projects happening to help recovering veterans. There's never been a better time for veterans in terms of support, but there's still more support needed, and it'd be nice to create something that was productive towards that.
Well, and it's people like you who've been able to get these sort of expeditions and charities going that are teaching us all that's something we should have done years ago for veterans, but at least we are addressing it hopefully now.
Oh, definitely. It's, as I say, it's never been better, I think, in the US or here for veterans. But that's not to say it's perfect. It's a long way from perfect, but the will's there, and people want that to show that support. So it's positive.
Well, look, we've been talking for well over an hour, and I think you deserve a nice drink now, because it's been exhausting listening to some of your escapades, frankly. But it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you, and my goodness, what an accomplishment and achievement. And as my doorbell goes, which is probably somebody from Amazon delivering something, I suppose I ought to go and answer it too. So, Mick, can I just say thank you very much, and it's been lovely to talk to you, and thank you for giving us your time. And I do hope that you're able to go on another Viking cruise quite soon and deliver your speaking engagements, your talks, because the people who got in touch say how brilliant it has been to listen to you. So thank you.
Missing Viking a lot. I can't wait to see everybody on a ship again.
Oh, it's terrible, isn't it? We're looking so forward to some sort of normal again. It will happen, but we just got to be patient. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been brilliant to see you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. And as I said, I've been absolutely really enjoying the book, Never Leave a Man Behind, and the other one I've got to read as well now, and they are really good. So Yar sucks boo to the publisher who turned him down first time. But that's it for another Thursday evening here on Viking Television. It's been wonderful to be with you, and we have another wonderful guest for you next week as well. So in the meantime, can I just say, please stay safe, stay happy and well, and I'll join you again next Thursday here on Viking Television. From me, Anne Diamond, good night.